All right, I think we are live. So hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to our webinar called Routing for Successful Transportation Startup, presented by First Services. I'm Amanda Huggett, Executive Editor for School Bus Fleet, and I will be your moderator for today's event. You may ask questions anytime throughout this presentation, and we will answer them either throughout or at the end. And if we don't get to your question, do not worry, you will be contacted by email with a response after the event. So let's get started. For today's webinar, I'm joined by four speakers: Edmund Dixon, Senior Principal Consultant for First Services; Scott Parker, Senior Director of Routing for First Services; Danny Dearden, Manager of Routing Services for First Services; and Marvin Lee, Director of Operations for Upper Darby School District in Pennsylvania. Thank you to all of you for being here, and I will let you each tell us a little bit more about yourselves. Edmund, let's start with you. Take it away.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone, or afternoon if you're on the East Coast. I am Edmund Dixon, a Senior Principal Consultant for First Services. Thank you, Amanda, for starting us off. Before we jump into it here, I want to first thank everyone for their time on this Wednesday morning. We have about 45 minutes to cover the slides in this webinar. The topics we'll be covering are, one, how to implement collaborative routing strategies for better operational efficiency, providing insights into streamlining startup processes to ensure smooth school year launches, and giving practical tips for maximizing resources and optimizing routes, providing best practices for delivering exceptional transportation service from day one, as well as giving real-world examples of successful district-level routing transformations. We have a lot of information to cover here, but we do want to keep this interactive in a sense, as Amanda mentioned. As we cover these various topics, we would like to ask questions in the chat. We'd like you to ask questions in the chat. We'll try to address them during the presentation versus waiting until the end. You can still ask questions at the end, but if you are like me and you kind of have your mind racing, I tend to forget, so I tend to put the questions in as we go through this. That being said, I've been a first student on the consulting side for about 3 years now. I actually started my career as an educator and administrator for Chicago Public Schools before I transitioned actually into consulting. I work with districts across North America who have various challenges within transportation, including routing, maintenance, technology, as well as other supportive services. I want to introduce you to the other three speakers today. First, we have Scott Parker. You're muted, Scott.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Scott Parker. I'm the Senior Director of Routing for First Services. I've been in this role for approximately 18 years.
Awesome. Marvin?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marvin Lee. I'm the Director of Operations for the Upper Darby School District. I worked for Philadelphia School District for about 10 years as a Deputy COO, and I came to Upper Darby School District about 5 years ago. And just in case you don't know where Upper Darby is, we're right next to Philadelphia.
Good to know. Danny?
Hey, I am Danny Dearden. I'm a Manager of Routing Services here for First Services. I'm getting close to 10 years now doing this stuff. So yeah, great to see everybody.
Good stuff. Thanks, Danny. Our First Services routing team consists of 60 plus members who have over 500 years of experience doing just that. They route. I like to say this team is technology agnostic as they work with all the leading routing softwares in the industry. They route and support over 30,000 vehicles on a day-to-day basis. Let's see, so they also route for districts anywhere from 5 routes all the way up to 100 plus routes. So they can do anything in the middle. Before we transition to slide 3, can I toss it to introduce Marvin Lee?
All right, so Upper Darby School District, we are 10th largest school district in Pennsylvania. We are one of the most diverse school districts in Pennsylvania. We have about 12,000 students. We have 13 schools. We have about 5,000 using our services, and we have about 100 buses and about 6 to 7 the van services in our school district.
Awesome. Scott Parker, you want to take it away?
Thank you, Edmund. I thought what would be helpful and hopefully of some interest to the folks on the call that, as I mentioned before, I've been in this role for approximately 18 years, and in this time, I've worked with literally hundreds of different school districts across the U.S. and Canada, from very small districts to very large districts. And in that time, I've observed a lot of things about school districts and what they do well, and maybe where there's some opportunities for improvement. And with that in mind, I've pulled together a list of 10 tips for improving your routing at your own school district, and recognize that some of these things you may be doing already in one way, shape, or form, but it's my hope that as we go through these, that you at least get a few ideas that you might be able to bring back to your own routing and transportation departments to improve your approach and elevate the routing that you're doing. And so the first one, and this is really my favorite tip, and again, this comes from working with a lot of different school districts, is hire overqualified routers and develop them. Routing is very complex, and it's a very specialized discipline, and it requires a particular skill set and a particular aptitude to do it well. And so what we've found is that I frankly, I see a number of school districts that kind of under-resource this position and have people that maybe aren't really well qualified to do the work. So as you're looking for people, you're looking for people with analytical aptitude. Certainly have to be very comfortable in working in systems and working with computers, but look for really high quality talent in this space. And when you think about it, transportation budgets of school districts, they spend a great deal of money in this space, and their costs are only going up. And one way to control those costs is to ensure that you're routing as efficiently as you possibly can. And one way of ensuring that is to make sure you've got very qualified routers and that you train and develop them as well. Next tip. The next tip is around the interface between your student information system and your routing system. And over the years, I've seen districts that manage this very effectively, and other districts that really struggle with this. And it makes a huge difference. If you don't have good quality, accurate student data coming into your routing system, the routing will be an enormous challenge for your school district. And so it's worth taking the time to work closely with the administration in your school district that you get this right. And one other thing that I'll add is that a lot of school districts are starting to feed transportation data, meaning the route, bus number, the stop location and time at the student level back into the student information system so that administrators can see the transportation assigned at the student level. Marvin has worked closely with us over the course of the last 2.5 years on his student data and the interface. And I thought I'd ask Marvin to kind of speak to a little bit of his experience with this as well.
Yeah, so I don't have to tell you this, but everything nowadays is data dependent now. And when the internet goes off, nothing's working now. So if you have a strong IT department in your school district, you're in a good shape. But if you're a small size or mid-sized school district, just like we are, you're kind of on your own. So one of the huge benefits of having teams like Scott and Danny is to basically tell them what kind of system do we have to integrate, and they do it for us. So for example, for us, we have to integrate the student information system, GPS, our payroll system, our routing system, and phone messaging system. We just tell them, hey, where the sources are. They just make it happen. And if they can't make it happen, they connect us with the regional and national expert that can help us with that. So that was a great benefit for us.
Thank you, Marvin. My next tip may seem obvious to some of the folks on the call, but you'd be surprised how many school districts I ask this question of, and they really don't have a quick and easy answer to this. But you really need to know what drives your vehicle requirements, and by that I mean most school districts operate multiple tiers or runs in the AM and the PM, and one of those tiers typically is what we like to say sometimes the long pole in the tent, or the highest number. And so let's say you're running a 3-tiered system, and in the afternoon your first tier is 80 runs, and your second tier is 100 runs, and your third tier is 90 runs. Well, in that case, your second tier at 100 runs is driving your vehicle and driver requirements. And so what's critical about this is if you are short drivers, or you're looking to cut your number of vehicles, you have to take runs out of that critical tier in order to reduce buses. But you first have to start with being mindful of that. And so it's just important to know how your tiers align, where your runs align, and where the long pole in the tent is, so to speak. Next tip is the idea of managing ridership. And most districts that we look at actually route to eligible ridership. And anybody in transportation knows that eligible ridership can be very different from actual ridership. And so if you know, or you can gather good data about who's actually riding, then you can more tightly develop runs and routes to serve the actual riders. And so there's a number of different ways that you can go about doing this. The simplest way, and we still use this extensively today, is to ask your drivers, provide them with sheets of assigned riders to each run, and ask them to check off who's riding, and maybe collect the data over several days so you have good information. Another way, and many of you are aware that there's technology that's been out for a little while, but it's starting to be used more extensively, and that is around ridership tracking, having students actually scan, or through an RFID card, swipe in onto and off the bus. And so regardless of how you gather this data, if you get the data loaded into your routing system, you can use that again to tailor your routes to who's actually riding your buses. It's probably a pretty extreme example, but a couple of years ago, we did a route to ridership project for a large Midwestern school district. And through that, again, very extreme example, but we were actually able to take 35 buses off the road, or reduce their number of vehicles required by 10%, which anybody in transportation knows is enormous. And so I guess my basic point here is that this is worth taking a closer look at if you're not doing this already. The next tip is to invest in your system map. All the routing systems out there are, of course, based on digital maps, and a lot of these systems are designed to use a lot of the data that you build into the maps, whether it's what streets can be traversed by a bus, or what streets what streets students might be able to cross to get to a bus stop, or where your hazard zones are, and even street speeds in the system. And this can represent a great deal of effort to get this right, but it's worth the investment in your time to do so, because the smarter and the more accurate your maps are in the system, the more heavy lifting the routing system will do in helping you to build smart, and not only that, safe routes in your system. So, if your map is not up to speed and it doesn't reflect all of the conditions in your school district, it's absolutely worth the time invested to get that right. Marvin, we've worked extensively with Marvin in this area, and I thought I'd ask you, Marvin, to kind of speak to your own experience with this in working with us.
Yeah, the correct map's gonna give you the opportunity to review your eligibility. It was a very sensitive topic in Upper Darby School District, but when I first came to the Upper Darby School District, we noticed about 600 students out of about 5,500 they were not eligible for transportation but assigned to a bus because the parents deemed the roads were hazardous, and traditionally they were getting buses. And I don't know about your state, but in Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Department of Education is the only agency that can deem a road hazardous, but our parents kind of rule the road. So we had a lot of discussions, a lot of comprehensive studies, and very controversial, but we decided to remove those students. So we gave those students about 1 year notice that you will be removed from the buses. Huge public outcry. We eventually actually removed the students in the following year, and it was even bigger outcry. But if you go to the second year, the following year, nobody talks about it because people got used to it. Nobody talks about it. And the great thing is that the principals loved it because if you think about it, they don't have to deal with transportation anymore. I think that's the best transportation, in my opinion. And they don't have to worry about Friday afternoon, bus is not coming to get the kids. This great thing. So if you have an opportunity to review your map, I highly recommend that you review your eligibility based on your map. And if you don't want to be the bad guy, maybe call Scott. Hey, Scott, I want you to be the bad guy and do it for us.
Thanks, Marvin. The next tip we have to offer up is to manage your service exceptions closely. Virtually every school district has a set list of policies, who they provide transportation to, what level of service, meaning kind of walk to stop distances, maximum ride times, all of those things. And, in working with various school districts over the years, we find that some of them manage these exceptions very effectively, meaning fairly strictly, and others are a lot looser with this. And, frankly, the more exceptions that you make in the system, it's going to complicate your transportation, and it's going to make it a lot more expensive as well. And so as you receive requests for, maybe somebody living in the walk zone that somebody says, well, we've always been provided transportation or the like, or hey, we've always had a stop right in front of our house, even though it may be above and beyond district policy. The thing with exceptions like that, again, they add to your costs, but they're also very difficult, as Marvin kind of suggested a moment ago, to undo. And so it's my recommendation, to the extent that you can, that you manage these these exceptions very closely, because again, cost, and they're difficult to kind of put the genie back into the bottle once you've done so. The next tip is just around the planning of the new school year. Anybody who's been involved in student transportation for any amount of time knows that the summer months are very challenging. They can be very stressful. There's a lot of work that has to be done in a very short period of time, and there's no getting around that. That's kind of a fact of life. But one of the things that you can do that will kind of improve your quality of life through July and August and even into September is plan. And so, for us, that means getting together with our customers, like Marvin at Upper Darby, in the springtime, when things are relatively calm, and sit down and work through all of your plans. When are you going to get your rolled over student file? When will that be available? When's your first day of school? When are When do drivers select their routes? When do you do dry runs? All of those things. When do you communicate transportation out to the community? You should have all of those dates nailed down, and with all of the activities behind that, who owns what, and all of the expectations well documented, and get everybody bought into it when you're not in the heat of the moment in July and August. And certainly anything that you can do to start the route preparation process in advance of the peak in July and August and September is only going to help you. And one other thing we do with this that I think everybody should do is, while things are still fresh from startup, you should get together with your constituents in your transportation department and in the administration and talk through what went well, what didn't go well, where there's opportunities for improvement. And this is really important. Document that in a way that when you go to plan for next year's startup, that information is readily available to you, and you're not making the same mistakes that you may have made in the current year again. The next tip is to leverage optimization tools. You may or may not be aware, most of the routing platforms out there come with a suite of different optimization tools for streamlining your runs and packaging your runs into routes. These tools candidly can be a little difficult to learn to use, and they're not perfect. They don't always produce routes that are ready to be operated on the road. But in certain circumstances, whether you're doing some scenario modeling, or you're setting up service for a brand new school in your district, these tools can take a lot of time out of the kind of the foundational building process for these routes. And we've used some of these tools on behalf of Marvin and Upper Darby over the course of the last couple of years. And Marvin, maybe you can talk a little bit more about what we've done with you.
Yeah, so we, for Darby School District and First Services, we have a built-in consulting services in the base contract. So last exercise that we have done was a build time optimization study. So Danny and Scott provided the workable solution for us. And obviously you have to go through the board, the community, and everybody else to go through to implement those solutions. But you will at least understand whether you have a workable solutions or not in your school district. And also, I'm pretty sure you're smart enough to do it yourself. But you have to remember, if you use third-party experts, those reports will probably carry a lot more weight than you're doing it by yourself. So definitely we use that information, and we highly encourage you to do the same thing.
Thank you, Marvin. Next tip is around GPS data. Today, most school districts have GPS on their buses. However, from my experience, again, in talking to and working with a lot of school districts, they don't always use that data to validate the accuracy of their existing routes, both in terms of the stops and the path that the bus takes, as well as the timing. And if you do have GPS on your buses, you've got a mountain of data that can be used to set up your system, your route plan, so that it more accurately reflects what's being routed. And if you're trying to do any optimization or efficiency work, or if you've done that, you know that you've got to start with accurate routes to be able to optimize those. And so we see a lot of school districts kind of leaving this opportunity on the table, but GPS can really help you in tuning your routes. And then our last tip, and this is probably maybe common sense to many of you, but analyze your route plans periodically. A lot of school districts do a good job of establishing their initial route plans at the beginning of the school year, and they're fairly tight and efficient. But as the year goes on and students enter and leave the school district or move, and stops get moved and resequenced and all of that, it's sometimes the routes lose their efficiency, if you will, or leave some opportunity on the table. And so it's a good idea to periodically just take a look, whether it's a school at a time or looking at your entire system, to see if there aren't things that maybe have changed or have gotten out of sync, if you will, and that present opportunities to tighten things back up and perhaps even take some routes off the road. If you've got one route that's overloaded and you've got another one that's adjacent that's underloaded, can you move some of those stops from one to another? Now, obviously, you need to be mindful of disruption mid school year, but it's always a good idea to look periodically at your routes to see if there's not anything you can do to tweak or improve them throughout the school year. Those were my 10 tips, again, from my experience in working with a lot of school districts over the past several years. And with that, I'm going to toss it back to Edmund.
Thanks, Scott. So the questions I must ask are, do you have highly qualified and well-trained routers? Are your routers 100% focused on routing? Do your routers hold long tenure in their positions? We know that there's high turnover in this position in schools. Are you using your routing system as effectively as possible? Do you have a clear and effective process for managing routing? Lastly, do you have the best available tools for your routing or for your routers? Now, if you say no to any of these questions, and I assume many of you have said no to at least one of these, then maybe routing services is something that your district would benefit from utilizing. Next slide. We want to transition into how we serve school districts on the routing side. So focusing on the left-hand side of the screen, we do work on a project-to-project basis, supporting districts who are interested in doing routing assessments, looking at the top, which is simply an unbiased evaluation and assessment of your current routes, looking for optimizations and efficiencies in those day-to-day routings. We also provide a system build or fixed incomplete routing systems with softwares. Some districts may be interested in a more in-depth look and assessment on such things as bell schedules, school opening and closing. We do a lot of those. Or if you're just looking at service level changes with student riders. On the right-hand side of the screen, some districts just prefer to get out of the routing game altogether. I won't get into specifics as we have a few slides here after, but routing services means you get a true partner on the day-to-day routing, as well as a new school year planning, which is also a major challenge for startup. This is kind of why we're here. Marvin, I'd like to ask you, why did you decide to contract out your routing to First Services?
Well, so when I was in Philadelphia School District as a head of the transportation department, we had in-house GIS expert, we had our director of routing services, we had 10 full-time routing analysts, and we also had an IT department that was like helping us with the project management. But when I came to Abu Dhabi School District, much smaller, mid-sized school district, I was actually trying to hire the routing analyst for many months, but we were not able to hire the person because it was such a niche position that you have to understand the street. You also have to understand the data. So we couldn't really find it. We actually tried it, actually had to fire the guy. I'm sorry. So we made a presentation to the board to eliminate actually the position, and we RFP out to have experts like, Danny and Scott, so we can get the help from those guys.
Awesome. Well, this is here where actually I'm going to pass it to Danny to talk a little more about what that looks like.
Awesome. Thanks, Edmund. I appreciate it. Yeah, so I am a manager here in the routing services department with First Services. And so I actually lead a team of routers that would get assigned to a district like Marvin's. And actually, one of my routing analysts is Marvin's routing analyst, Amy. And so essentially, I'm just going to kind of briefly expound upon kind of what we do. As you just heard, you'll get an experienced router, someone who really knows the ins and outs of whatever leading platform that you choose to use, you're already using. And they essentially just take over the day-to-day routing and all of that summer planning and all of that work of managing that data and managing that system for your school district. And so we really do become a partner of yours. We really like to think of ourselves as just an extension of your team. And in addition to having that specific routing lead that is going to be interfacing with, it might be a dispatcher or a location manager or a transportation director, sort of whoever that liaison is at the district, you also get a lot of backup for that person, right? And so you have someone like me, someone who they directly report to, but I'm also on the weekly meetings and calls that we set up to make sure that we're hitting specific milestones. And also I'm there to support the routing analysts in case they have any specific challenges that they need help getting over. And beyond that, we have even more support coming in from behind us. So, we have this massive, very large, I should say, 60 plus routers organization that can really help back us up when we need to, when that workflow in the summer, as you guys know, really starts to spill over and become, very, very challenging. And so we have a lot of support and a lot of resources, and it's really been a huge boon and advantage for us. And in addition to that, you might think, well, what if my routing analyst is out sick or taking vacation? Well, we also build these backup groups. And so each routing analyst is supported by 4 or 5 others that, will know the ins and outs, be able to cover essentially, all of the duties for that routing analyst when they're gone. The other thing that we do, of course, when things finally start to slow down, once we're out of that summer startup cycle, is that we do provide our routers with very comprehensive and ongoing training. And that's really a big part of it. We really do invest very heavily to make sure that not only are they experts at actually using those platforms, but they're actually able to kind of take the data out of those platforms and analyze it very, very effectively. And so, we're training on how to view those and use those analytics, to provide some insightful information for districts like Upper Darby. And I guess, Marvin, I'd toss it to you. His routing analyst, Amy, has become a great partner there. I guess I just want to ask you sort of how does your team kind of engage, with us on the day-to-day, and how does that work for you guys?
Yeah, sure. So we obviously have a daily conversations with Danny and Amy on a daily basis. And it's a huge to have like a designated routing analyst who knows our street, our people, our students. And Danny and Amy have been extremely responsive to any request that we have, especially for like a subsidy reports or any kind of managerial report. And to me, the most important thing was having the segregation of duties. So we are taking the authorization piece out of our operations, so there's no more favoritism. So nobody can give this person or that person like a ridership because they know the person, or like somebody's like strong arming us. So like we are kind of just give it to them so that they can, they can calm down. So having that piece, like segregating the duty, like authorization piece out of it, was a huge piece for us.
Awesome, thanks, Marvin. So I'd like to take a second just to talk about our tools, all the things that we use. You obviously heard that we use and can utilize all of the leading routing solutions a couple of times throughout this presentation, but we also have some things that I'm a little bit more excited to talk about, some internal tools that we use that we developed in-house. So the first one you see there is R2X. It's the request management tool. Sometimes you'll just hear me refer to it as the request tool. And essentially what it is we created just an online platform. It's just a web page that you'd go to, and you'd be able to exchange requests with us. And so when a student comes into the district, you have a new student request, special needs requests, or if they have an alternate drop off or pickup, and you need to submit that request to our transportation department, to our routing analyst, we just have this very, very nice structured, very, very accessible, visible system where those requests can be put in. And so you really just go, and you fill out the data for that student. It goes into a work queue, and then our routing analyst is going to be alerted to that. They're going to see it. The best part of this is it's it creates a lot of accountability on all ends, right? Because it's going to say when it was put in, when the request was actually completed, and it's going to have all the routing information there. And we can also have, a conversation with the requester back and forth within that request. And so it's all in one very convenient place that everyone has visibility to. And it helps us manage that workflow, because you guys know you're going to get a massive influx of changes and requests that come through that startup period. And managing those through just email or Google Sheets can sometimes be difficult. We've had some districts that just want us to, highlight students on a Google Sheet that they've prepared, and that can lead to some confusion. Sometimes you've got a little bit of he said, she said, oh, I did that, a couple of days ago, things like that. This is very, very transparent, and you know exactly what workflow you have to get through. So, it's really nice, and we can also report out of it too. It's great for our operations peoples, because they can print out some reports that say, what got done today? What routes do I need to print out? And all of that is very, very easily accessible within that R2X system. So, I'm Marvin. I know you guys utilize this to some effect, I think, for some special needs students and things like that. How has your experience been with R2X?
Yeah, I think the best feature of the system is that it makes everybody very honest, because everything is timestamped. So we can see when they made a request. They can't, say like we gave you the request 2 weeks ago. You can't do that anymore. And how we use it in our school district is that leading up to the school district, and maybe up to like 2 weeks during the a busy a school opening period, we have a data process and data protocols to transfer data to the first student team. Because there's so many changes happening. But once things calm down, maybe after in November, maybe October time period, we start using R2X, and it's great, and becomes a kind of autopilot for us.
Awesome. Thanks, Marvin. The next tool here you'll see is the first compare tool. And sometimes you'll just hear me refer to it as the compare tool. This is actually a really, really neat tool. It's extremely useful. What you'll notice if you've had any experience in any of these routing solutions is they don't do a great job of providing you with a list of changes that happen that day. You might have your system information flow come in the morning, right? That upload comes through. New students, address changes. Some students might change some stops and things like that. But you don't really have visibility as to everything that actually changed that day, and you might go in there and do some work. And so your operations team might have kind of a more difficult time understanding, what route sheets do I print? What actually changed today? What's important? How do I notify families and things like that? And so what the compare tool does is, and we can use this with any of the routing solutions, is we kick out a report, and we can have whatever data that we want to compare there. So that can be if a bus stop changed, if a student changed schools, if they're new. We can even set thresholds for time. Let's say you have existing students on a stop, and their stop time, because of some other changes, has now changed by about, 7 minutes. You can set the threshold to be 5, 6, 7, 10 minutes, whatever you want to see on that report. That way, when those changes occur, you can notify those families, hey, your bus time's actually changed. It's now back 8 minutes or something like that. And so it's a very, very useful tool to be able to see exactly what changed, who it changed for. Even if, like I said, if a specific change didn't affect that student, it just affected their time that they're being picked up, that's going to report that with you or for you. And so it's incredibly useful. It has a nice short list tab of, just print these routes. You get it in the morning, and you know exactly what you need to do, and you can see exactly what changed. So very, very useful, and we absolutely love it. All right, so I'll go ahead and jump into our process. So when you sign up with routing services, sort of what happens, right? And that new customer onboarding is sort of tailored to each individual district. You might have a system that you already have in place, but you're just not keeping it up to date. So you might just need to remediate that system. You might not have software at all, and you need us to help you decide sort of what you want to use and sort of the use cases and things like that. And so we might just build it from scratch for you. And then, of course, we do a very thorough review of your policies and requirements. So, whatever your rules are for your district, and they vary wildly. We can have different walk to stops and streets that we can walk down and all that good stuff. So we just do a very, very thorough analysis of what those policies are to make sure that we're abiding by them, and we're providing not just efficient routes, because we talk a lot about efficiency, but very safe routes, right? We don't want students crossing streets that they can't cross and things like that. So very, very important that we go through that process with you guys and make sure that we're doing what we need to. And then the other thing that's been talked about a little bit is just sort of the new school year startup process. We start this very, very early. We will oftentimes start that process before the previous school year has even ended. Within those routing platforms, you can do a grade advance. You can kind of model that next year and kind of get all that information started so that when you get the next year's rolled up student file from the district student information system, you have so much of the foundation covered and so many of the changes already done that it really sets you up for having a successful startup. And when you have that really tight time window in summer, any amount of time that you can get yourself by yourself is invaluable. So in addition to starting that process, we also start our timelines very, very, very early on. And so what we do is we'll meet with someone like Marvin and his transportation department and start establishing a timeline like, hey, when are you guys going to have that rollover file? When do you guys need routes by? When are we going to have the feedback from the drivers? And when are we going to send out that information to the parents and things like that? So we have all of these milestones and all these dates that we also have reminders from the system that we set it up in to be able to say, hey, you've got a student file due in 3 days. Or, hey, we're a couple days late on this item and things like that. So it just keeps us on task and keeps us accountable for the things that we own and that we're responsible for. So really, really helps, keep everything on track. And then, kind of once we're through that process, we get you through startup. It's ongoing route management. As you have students move throughout your district, or you have McKinney-Vento students or whatever it is, students that are new students coming to the district, we're going to manage that on the day-to-day for you and just make sure that we're keeping the system and keeping your routes up to date and your operation apprised of all the changes that are going on. And then, as we also talked about, in that sort of slower season, we can start to do some modeling for you. If you're going to close a school and open a new school, we can tell you sort of what that's going to look like and model that for you so you see what the effects are. If you're thinking about making some bell time changes, maybe some boundary changes, things like that. We do those projects, all throughout the year, when we have that time to do that. So really just kind of a one-stop shop. We do sort of all that stuff for you. We report it to you, and we work really as a part of your district. And I guess, Marvin, I'll kind of toss it to you here. How do you feel? How was your onboarding process with us? That initial learning curve. How did that go for you?
Yeah, so when you have to manage a summer routing by yourself, it always becomes a project. And even if you use the managed routing services like First Services, the first year will be always a struggle because you're gonna find a lot of things that you're trying to codify in a new system, reviewed by somebody else. It's always gonna be a struggle. There's a lot of reconciliations to be done. And in our first year, volume of those changes was so tremendous. I was so defeated. I had to call Scott. Hey, Scott, I don't know if it's going to work out. And Scott was able to send Amy to our shop for a whole week. And we were able to hammer a lot of things out. The first year was that. Second year, you're going to have a much smoother operations because you kind of know about what to expect. Third year, it was kind of boring. It was our third year with the services with Amy and Danny. And it was very uneventful, boring, and things were kind of done. So that was my experience.
No, absolutely. Yeah. No, thanks, Marvin. I appreciate the insight there. Yeah, it is always tricky that first year. But as we get going, like you said, it can get boring. It can get nice and streamlined, which we like. Boring is good. So with that, I'll go ahead and toss it back to Edmund.
Thanks, Danny. To wrap things up, routing can be challenging. We've talked about the highs and the lows. It requires technical expertise, and ineffective routing is costly to your budget. Using a valued partner can elevate the quality of your routes and increase time for your districts to focus on other priorities, as Marvin mentioned. It's boring. You did it, Amanda?
I think we may be having some technical
Sorry, my
difficulties.
internet dropped for a second. I'm back.
Okay.
All right. So, are we ready to move into Q&A?
Let's do it.
Whoopsies, there's my video. Sorry, guys. All right, perfect. So we have a few questions that have come in. If someone prefers a router in person or on site, how does that work for a school district?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and field that. Our default model is to work on a remote basis from the school district. Now, that said, and you even heard Marvin reference this, when needed and when appropriate, we will have routers spend time on site to learn a new location, or to maybe work with some new people at the school district. And we have certain school districts that we have people on site for startup every year. That said, we pride ourselves on being very flexible and tailoring our services to what's important to school districts. So if you're interested in the services that we've talked about here, but you absolutely require an on-site router, that's something that we could work with you on. We pride ourselves again in being flexible and tailoring our services to the wants and needs of our customers.
Great answer. One thing I do want to add, and we've reiterated this fact, is being a true partner to a district, utilizing Marvin and so forth, is that communication is the biggest thing here. And the effective communication, as the next administrator in a school district, I can tell you, communicating between the routers, the bus drivers, the internal team, the administration is the most key and the most important part in making sure this is everything's aligned and everything moves forward.
Fantastic. And to all of our viewers, you can have questions of your own in the comments, and we will get to them in just a moment. Here's one more from Marvin. How has your startup been prior to First Services as your routing partner versus before they started supporting you?
Yeah, just like I mentioned before, always a project, because we have to deal with the data that's coming in different format, and we have to make sure that we are assigning those routes on time. So it's always becoming a project. But once we start dealing with the First Services, first year was pretty tough. Second year was better, but the third year was much better. Yeah.
Awesome. And it looks like we have a contractor on this webinar. They are wondering what routing software is best for contractors to use.
I'll go ahead and field that. You may have heard us say a couple of times that we're software agnostic. We do work with all the leading software vendors and software solutions out there. We've got a big team that's very deep in their technical expertise. I'm not going to further the question of what the best solution is for either a school district or a contractor is a very layered one. But what we bring to the table is expertise in all of these packages, and frankly, some of them do some things better than others do. And so what we typically do is talk to customers about their requirements, what's important to them, do they have any unique particular issues around transportation, and then based on just kind of understanding all of the kind of collecting all those data points, we make recommendations to the school district, and we tell them why we've made that recommendation. But at the end of the day, if a district has a strong opinion on the software that they want to use, we will defer to them because, again, we work with all the leading packages. But without knowing a lot more about the requirements and the priorities of a district, it's impossible. And I won't say, you should use X here.
All right. Another attendee here is asking, are there any costs associated with changes to runs?
Yeah, so our service, our routing service, is based on a annual fee basis, and the fee is driven by the number of routes, the number of tiers, the number of sped routes that you operate, and based on all that information, we can quote a price again that would be an annual cost for the service. But once you pay for that service, or once you've signed up for that, there's no by the drink sort of charges. We don't charge for individual changes. We literally don't charge for anything that you may have request of us. It even includes, and we lay this all out in a proposal, a certain number of hours on an annual basis where we can do analysis or scenario modeling. Danny mentioned opening or closing the schools. You're thinking of modifying your bell times or changing your transportation eligibility or levels of service. We have tools and expertise to do all of that sort of modeling, and we build a certain amount of that into our annual fee. But there's not a fee for run or route modifications throughout the course of the school year. That's all baked into that single fee.
Great. One other question we've got here is, what softwares do you work with? I assume this is directed at softwares the First Services integrate.
Again, I'm not going to name specific names. I think anybody who's been in the industry knows that there's a number of solutions out there that are used pretty extensively throughout the K through 12 market, and we work with them all. And we, do we have personal preferences given certain circumstances within school districts or unique requirements? Sure, and we'd make those recommendations as appropriate. But we literally work with all of the leading software solutions that are out there.
Fantastic. One more reminder, if anyone listening in has any questions, please pop them in your comment box. And in the meantime, I'm going to ask just one of my own. Scott, you shared 10 tips earlier for more efficient routing, but let's say there's someone listening who isn't ready to commit to using a service like First Student quite yet. Is there one major or one minor, one thing they can do to really move the needle into better routing for their district?
Yeah, I'll go back to my first tip in that having a well-qualified, well-trained router that ideally has some experience, hopefully some significant experience with student transportation and even the conditions at your local school district, gives you a huge running start in ensuring that you're routing effectively and using the minimum number of buses and working within the available resources that you have. But and as I shared earlier on when I was giving the tip, from my experience, I think school districts tend to underestimate what's required to manage this function effectively. I like to say hire overqualified people or hire First Services.
Mm-hmm. Great. Anyone else here, our presenters, any kind of final takeaways you want to make sure people leave today with?
I think we're good.
Good.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, that is it for our time together. Then I want to thank all of you who have been here with us for this hour together. I also want to thank our presenters today, Marvin Lee, Danny Dearden, Scott Parker, and Edmund Dixon. Thank you so much for your expertise.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This webinar, yes, this webinar will be available on demand on the School Bus Fleet website. You can find it at schoolbusfleet.com/webinars. And that's all we have for you today. We hope to see you again in another webinar. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.